want to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered on the traditional territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, and that we commit to fighting for justice for the first people of this land. I also want to acknowledge my incredible Ottawa and surrounding region team. Thank you so much for being here. You are all amazing. We're here to talk about one of the things that's on a lot of people's minds, how we can come out of this pandemic by investing in people and supporting the folks that need help, investing in our healthcare, tackling the housing crisis. How can we help people out, and how can we afford to do that? And we know why people are worried, because they've seen Liberals and Conservatives kind of go from the same playbook, either one or two options. Either they cut the help that people need, every time they make a promise, they cut something else, or they put the pressure back on the same people that have actually sacrificed so much in this difficult time. They put the burden back on workers or small businesses. We are the only party saying it doesn't have to be that way. We've been saying we believe that the ultra-rich should pay their fair share so we can invest in people. And today I want to talk about closing some of the loopholes specifically, and increasing enforcement as a way to raise funds. We've heard from a lot of public sector workers in the CRA who said if they had the right resources, if they had enough resources and staffing, they would be able to, with enforcement alone and closing loopholes alone, they would be able to increase revenue by $25 billion a year. And we look at what's happened over the past 6 years. The past 6 years, while Justin Trudeau's been in power, despite the Panama Papers and a number of other documents that have shown the super wealthy hiding their fair share, or not paying their fair share, hiding their wealth, despite that, there's not been a single conviction in 6 years for tax evasion. Not a single conviction. We know that we can do better. Justin Trudeau and Conservatives before him have let the super rich have a free ride. We want to put an end to that. We want to put an end to the offshore tax havens. We want to make sure that we are closing loopholes. We want to make sure that we are giving the CRA enough resources by investing in staffing and tools so that they can crack down with enforcement and increase revenue. We can invest in a future. And to do that, if you believe that the super wealthy should pay their fair share, if you believe we need to increase enforcement for the super wealthy and make sure that wealthy corporations are actually contributing fairly, if you believe in that, then you need to vote. The only way we can make this happen is by voting, and by voting New Democrat. The Liberals haven't done this. They might promise a number of things in this campaign, but they won't deliver because we've seen their track record. They don't want to make this a priority. They have not made the wealthy pay their fair share. We are going to do that. So if you want to make that happen, so we can invest in people, invest in a brighter future, you need to vote. Donc, un grand merci d'être ici. Je suis ici avec mon équipe
de
Ottawa et aussi la région autour d'Ottawa.
The surrounding region. I'm so proud of my team. Thank you for being here. Today we'll talk about how we can get the ultra-rich to pay their fair share to invest in people. Because many people have concerns. They're scared for the future because they've seen former governments, Liberal and Conservative, in an economic crisis, either cut aid to people or put more pressure on the shoulders of workers. We're the only party with a third option, which is to get the ultra-rich to pay their fair share. But we have to put an end to the ways that people can escape paying taxes. So the ultra-rich hide their wealth and don't pay their fair share. Also, we want to strengthen the application of the law. And by doing this and working together with our public service, we can increase our revenues by up to $25 billion per year. But with the Conservatives and the Liberals, it's not possible, because we've seen their track record. They let the ultra-rich have a small percentage of contribution with record profits without paying their fair share. We can't allow that. I also want to underscore how Justin Trudeau had 6 years to do something new, but he continued with the same policy. In fact, in the 6 years he was Prime Minister, he has not forced the big companies or ultra-rich to pay their fair share. So we'll change that, and we'll change it together. But if you want us to face this challenge. If you want the ultra-rich to pay their fair share, you must vote. And you must vote for the NDP. It won't change if we continue with the Liberals and Conservatives. So once again, thank you. And I have a lot of hope for the future. We know if we work together, we can build a better society and put an end to these tax evasions and apply this money to invest in people in the regions. It can be done. Thank you.
From Global News. Good morning. Over here.
Hey.
I know you've been asked this quite a few times, but I don't feel that you've given an answer. Would you support an Aaron O'Toole minority government?
See, the problem with and I don't mind the question, I welcome people asking, is that I don't want to, I'm running in this campaign to become prime minister. And so the question requires me to accept defeat. I'm not going to do that. I'm fighting for people. We're not going to give up. We're going to fight to the end because we believe strongly that people deserve a new Democrat government. But I get your question. You're asking my position on the Conservatives. And let me be very clear. I do not believe Aaron O'Toole will make the decisions necessary to help people out. We've seen his government's track record. They might campaign for things right now, but we have seen what Conservatives done, which is to cut health. And then we saw Justin Trudeau criticize Mr. Harper's cuts to healthcare and then implement the very same cuts or continue with those very same cuts when he became prime minister. So I don't think that Mr. Trudeau would be a good prime minister to help us make the decisions necessary to make the super rich pay their fair share to invest in people. So I think neither Aaron O'Toole or Justin Trudeau will be the right prime minister to help us come out of this pandemic, to give people the help they need, to invest in the solutions that people need. So neither of them are the good option for people. New Democrats are the only option that's going to lift up people, invest in healthcare, and make the super rich pay their fair share so we can invest in the things that people need.
On your announcement today, the idea of closing the loopholes and taxing the ultra-rich is, exactly what you campaigned on in 2019. Why do you think this will bring more people to you this time around?
We just saw a bunch of billionaires go to space while people went through the worst economic crisis of their lives. People are pretty frustrated with that. They're saying, why is it that we have a system that I can work as hard as I want, keep on struggling, but I don't get ahead? And they look at the super wealthy, and just because they're billionaires, they don't pay their fair share. That doesn't sit right with people. And if we started making sure that the super wealthy just paid their fair share, paid what they should be paying, we could invest in the solutions that people need. We could invest in healthcare. We could tackle the housing crisis. We could do so much more. So people want to see that happen. I think we're in a different time now, and people are more open to this, and people want to see this happen. And we are the party saying we can do it.
Next question, Kevin Gallagher, CTV News.
Good morning.
It's been a long time.
Oh, you want to bring the mic up? I think they can. We're just adjusting. I'm too tall. All right.
That's the customer service you get with New Democrats.
I appreciate it. I'm around all week. Listen, I'd like some more details. We've heard you talk about closing tax loopholes before. Specifically, can you give us some specifics about what you would do? Is this legislation? Is this something that could be done through regulation? It seems that there's a very broad subject, and I don't feel like a lot of Canadians quite understand, how much money does this mean for tax revenue? What does that look like if you're going to close tax loopholes? Give us some specifics, please.
Sure. One specific example I want to start with is the enforcement side of this. And we've spoken with public sector workers, folks that work in the CRA, and they said with an investment in resources and staffing that the public sector would be able to return higher revenues. There hasn't been enforcement. There hasn't been the same sort of oversight and transparency necessary, and there hasn't been enough staff to do that. So what we're planning on doing is with a $100 million investment in our public service, in specifically the CRA, the tools and the staff required, we could see as high as a $25 billion return in terms of taxes and revenue that we can claim in just 1 year. And this has been something that public sector workers have put out. PIPs and other public sector organizations have said we could do this. If we were given the tools, if we were given the resources and the staffing, we could see a significant increase in revenue. That's just one measure. We know, for example, right now it is completely legal for companies in Canada to make profits in Canada, entirely Canadian profits off the backs of Canadians, take that entire profit and put it into a bank in the Caribbean, in an offshore tax haven, and then effectively not pay any taxes. That is completely allowed to happen. we would end that and say that that is no longer allowed with some clear laws that say a Canadian company cannot do that. Companies like Amazon make profits in Canada, but pay no taxes here. They pay virtually no tax on the revenue that they're making off the backs of Canadians. France has proposed a 3% tax on revenue in the country that these web giants are making their profits. Those are some of the concrete steps we would take, which would significantly improve revenue. I just mentioned one of those tools would raise $25 billion. If you put these together, these are tens and tens of billions of dollars of revenue that we could increase that would help us pay for the programs that we need.
Justin Trudeau has been criticized for not defining the middle class. He talks about it all the time. It's a center point of a lot of his policies. And you're talking about the ultra-rich a lot this campaign. Will you define what the ultra-rich is? Are we talking about a level of income? Please be specific with this definition.
Sure. We're looking at people that are using offshore tax havens. You know, everyday working people, they don't have an offshore tax haven where they hide their money when they make profit. That's the ultra-rich. We're talking about Amazon, a company that's one of the wealthiest companies in the world that pays no taxes in Canada. That's the ultra-rich. We're talking about folks that are billionaires, the 44 billionaires in Canada that in this pandemic, because of the laws that Justin Trudeau has continued and previous Liberals and Conservatives have put in place, have increased their wealth to the tune of $78 billion, these 44 billionaires. These are the ultra-rich. These are the folks that are not paying their fair share simply because they're super wealthy. That can't continue.
Next question, Nicolas Boisvert from CBC News.
Morning, Mr. Singh. You've said many, many times that you're against the Trans Mountain pipeline, but last night on the French language leader special, you said that you would evaluate it as an NDP government. Can you explain what you meant by that? Is that would you consider keeping it, selling it? What did you mean by that?
Well, it's clear I've been opposed to this project. I've been exposed to the expansion, and a new Democrat government would never have purchased it. When it comes to decisions that governments have to make, you need to know the assets and know the information before you make a decision in terms of what's in the best interest of Canadians, and I think that's prudent and smart governance.
Is it naive to think that taxing the rich, these corporations that have access to the best tax lawyers money can buy, who have the ability to move money all around the world, that you'll actually be able to stay ahead of them and make sure that they don't find other loopholes eventually?
I see why people would think that, and I understand that consideration. People wondering, these are the super wealthy. How could we go after them? They've got the best accountants. They've got the best team on their side. We also have the best team. We have some of the most professional and well-trained public service workers. And if we funded them appropriately, staffed up enough workers, and gave them the tools necessary, they absolutely could crack down with enforcement to tackle tax evasion and make sure the super wealthy were paying their fair share. We've got some of the best team. We've got the best team in the world, but we need to make sure that they're properly equipped and they're staffed up. And so our accountants and our Canadian workers in our public service, given the right tools, could absolutely make sure that the super wealthy pay their fair share, without a doubt.
Prochaine question, Sébastien Desrosiers, Radio-Canada.
Next
Bonjour,
question,
Monsieur Singh.
Mr. Singh. The theme of the environment is very much a part of your announcement. You have proposed, you're talking about the Trans Mountain expansion. But yesterday you said you were ready to evaluate the future of this project. Are you committed to canceling the TMX? It's the same answer I gave a few days ago. We are against that project. It's clear that it was a bad decision. We are against subsidizing oil and gas. If there's a new Democrat government, there won't be that. We will invest in renewable energy, we'll invest in a future that reduces emissions and creates good jobs and fights the climate crisis. That's our priority. But at each decision made as a government, we need to evaluate the facts before making the decision in the interests of Canadians. In some cases, you're very clear. For example, the third link in Quebec as something that will not happen. Why not take a strong, firm position in all TMX? The third link is not begun. It's clear that we can invest in projects that will reduce emissions, but the third link is not a project that would bring or follow our goal to face the climate crisis. This is why it's not a project I want to invest in. I don't think it's a good use of our resources, but we're ready to work together with Quebec to find other projects, other investments in infrastructure where we can improve the quality of life while reducing emissions. Do something to defend our environment and face the climate crisis.
The NDP has made some big spending promises. We've got guaranteed livable income for folks. We've got universal pharmacare, $10 a day child care. We've got elimination of for-profit homes, dental care, mental health care. These have all been promised in the short term or the long term under an NDP government. And there are also some big crackdown promises, but I'm wondering, with all the extra spending that this will entail, if these promises are made good on, I'm curious whether you're confident that the deficit or debt would continue to go down with the higher taxes and loophole closings you're promising, despite all this extra spending.
I think coming out of an economic crisis, we can't afford not to invest in people. The alternative would be pretty dire. We're already in a housing crisis. It's only been made worse by this pandemic. To see young people who tell me they can't ever imagine owning their own home, to see that dream just crushed and that they can't believe it's something within their power or within their future, it means that we've got to do something about it. It means that we have to respond. To meet with people who can't afford their medication and aren't getting the medication that they need to stay well because it's too expensive, we need to fix that. We're the only country in the world that has this universal healthcare that hasn't fixed this problem, to include medication coverage. There are so many really dire issues that we're up against that we can't just allow to continue. So I know there's going to be folks that say it's not possible, but those folks have been in power for a long time and they benefited off of this kind of dreaming less and having less hopes for what we can build and what we can achieve. I believe we need to make these things happen. And I believe if you've got a will, if you believe in making these things happen, you can make them. On top of that, there are significant revenue, and we're the only party with a real plan to say we can invest in people by making the ultra-rich pay their fair share, and we've got a real plan to do that. Anytime that you hear the Liberals make a promise or the Conservatives make a promise, you should also hear that they're either going to cut something else or that they're going to put the burden on you and your family. We're the only ones with a real plan that says it's not going to fall on you and your families. It's not going to be cutting help. We're going to invest in people by making the super wealthy pay their fair share. We've got the only credible plan to do that.
On dental care and mental health care, just to clarify, I just wanted to confirm that under an NDP government, is the pledge to create a roadmap and work with provinces in the first few years of an NDP government to work toward those two goals of universal dental care and mental health care? Or is the goal actually to, within the first 2 years, say, establish one or both of those things?
With the dental care program, we have a program that was costed out by the Parliamentary Budget Office for us to put in place immediately federal coverage for people that earn less than $60,000, for families that earn less than $60,000 a year immediately. So that would help anyone who has no coverage right now, under $60,000 a year, to immediately get coverage. This would cover immediately a vast and significant portion of Canadians who have no coverage at this point. That would be our first step, a real concrete step that's very achievable. It's been costed out, and it's within the scheme of what spending is available. It's very achievable, and we can do that right away. And our ultimate goal is we want to make sure that dental care is included in our healthcare system, and that would take some more work and more negotiation, working with provinces and territories, work that we're not afraid of doing, but we want to immediately start with a program that would give people coverage. With mental health services, similarly, we want to start with some immediate help to get people that support, knowing that this crisis has been so hard. So many people are struggling with mental health. We want to start with some immediate improvement in access, or so many people can't access any mental health. And then we want to eventually work towards, with provinces and territories, including mental health supports into our healthcare system as well.
Prochaine question, Boris Proulx, Le Devoir.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh, bienvenue à Ottawa.
Welcome to back to Ottawa. You said again that you would cut all subsidies to oil and gas. You said that you were not close to helping them when they need to reduce their carbon emissions. So please clarify, would you give money to oil and gas companies if it was to attain certain objectives? No. So the conservative and liberal approach was to give money to companies and say, you must do this and that thing, but they give subsidy to oil and gas, hoping that they'll do what they should. The difference is we will immediately cut subsidies and blank checks, these investments without conditions, and we will replace it with an approach to directly invest with firm guarantees for projects where the initiative is to reduce emissions. We'll be very clear. All investment of a new Democratic government will reduce our emissions. We will invest in renewable energy to do what is necessary to face the climate crisis with strict guarantees. Well, you haven't really explained how that differs from subsidies, but I'd like to move on to another question. You talk about the ultra-rich. How many ultra-rich are there in Canada? For us, it's really talking about the 44 billionaires who have profited more than $78 billion during this crisis, this pandemic. We're talking about people who use loopholes to hide their wealth. We're talking about big companies who make profits here in Canada but don't pay their fair share. We're talking about web giants like Amazon that made record profits over the pandemic but paid virtually no tax in Canada. These are the ultra-rich, and we'll make sure they pay their fair share.
Next question, Taylor Blewett, Ottawa Citizen.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. We've seen you express your disappointment over the vitriol that the Liberal leader has faced while campaigning. But like the other major parties, the NDP has also published messaging that distorts the truth, that assigns personal blame to the Prime Minister for things like the housing crisis. You know, over the weekend, for instance, you said the Prime Minister specifically has profited off student debt and you would immediately move interest on student loans. As you know, there's a freeze already on interest accumulation until 2023, and the Prime Minister personally obviously isn't profiting off student debt. Do you think that the spin and the leader-focused attacks the party has been participating in contribute to the toxicity we've seen during this campaign?
Not at all. When we are directing our concerns towards the Prime Minister who makes a decision, it is absolutely the Prime Minister and his government that benefit from those decisions. And they make choices, and people should know the choices they make. We are saying that there should never be permanently interest, that permanent interest should be permanently removed from any federal debt. It's very different from a temporary freeze. And it is a fact that in the 6 years that Justin Trudeau has been Prime Minister, that if you look at the federal interest that's been collected for student debt, that has been a $4 billion cost to students. That's a fact. And the Prime Minister is responsible for that. Now, I don't believe in attacking someone just because I don't like them or because they're bad. That's horrible and shouldn't happen. But in politics, people should know the decisions that Prime Ministers are making. And absolutely, the Prime Minister is responsible for the outcomes that are happening. If we've got a housing crisis and the federal government has the power to tackle it, and the cost of homes have gone up in the 6 years that Justin Trudeau has been Prime Minister by an average of $300,000, and yes, that is a Prime Minister. He's the one calling the shots. He could have made different decisions. He could have made different investments. People should be upset at that. But I don't want people to be arbitrarily upset at Justin Trudeau because they don't like the way he looks or the way he dresses. That's wrong, and that's not something I'm ever going to do. But I absolutely believe people should know the decisions that a Prime Minister makes directly impact your life. And if they make bad decisions, you should know about them, and you should know those outcomes. So I'm always going to point those out and show that there's better choices that we can make. And it's important that people know that the decisions that Prime Ministers make directly impact your life, and I would make different decisions that would help people out.
And if the NDP is again an opposition party to a minority government, how would you push the government specifically to address the significant problems we're seeing in Ottawa and across the country when it comes to housing access and housing affordability?
I'll flip the question. I won't accept that we'll be in a minority. Maybe I'll take that we'll be in a minority New Democrat government. And what we would do is immediately invest in housing in a serious way. We've got a crisis. And we've met with so many people that can't buy a home. We met with people that live in their communities. We'll take Ottawa, for example. I met young people graduating from Ottawa U, and they're saying, we want to live here. This is where our family is. This is where our home is. This is where our friends are. But we can't afford to buy a home here, so we're going to have to go somewhere else. And I love the idea of people wanting to go to different parts of the country, but I am saddened if people have to leave their home behind because they can't afford to live there. That should not be how things are. And that's the reality. So what we would do is get big money out of housing. We know that there is significant investments from large corporations, which mean a first-time home buyer, when they're trying to buy their first home, is competing with a wealthy corporation, and that should never happen. We know that because of the lack of investments in housing, that there's no options for affordable rentals or places that are within people's budgets. So we would invest massively to build 500,000 new homes that are in people's budgets. We want to take this housing crisis seriously, not just talk about it, make announcements about it, but we want to do something about it. Justin Trudeau has had 6 years, and it's true. In those 6 years, he has the worst record on housing affordability amongst all OECD countries. That's a criticism of his decisions, and I think we can make better decisions.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh. Vincent Gosselin du CKJ 92.5 et Radio Ville-Marie.
From Montreal Radio. Today's announcement, I'll piggyback on my colleague from Le Devoir. You keep talking about the ultra-rich. Can you first concretely explain what is an ultra-rich and how many there are? Do you have detailed data? Examples of the ultra-rich are the 44 richest, the billionaires who made $78 billion in this pandemic. And while the small people had to make sacrifices, like small businesses closed their doors, the ultra-rich made the most money. The ultra-rich are the big web giants like Amazon, made record profits in Canada and pay virtually no tax in Canada.